A pine forest in the rain, 12 miles from the nearest streetlight. A steel-toed work jacket 2 sizes too big, the name of another man stitched above the pocket. A girl of 19 standing at the tree line with $11 in her fist and a black dog pressed against the back of her knees. Deeper in the woods, past the garden where a dead man once knelt over tomato cages, a chapel rises 8 meters into the black sky. Cedar shingles gone dark with moss. A bell tower with no bell. Stained glass boarded from the inside. And on the front door, 3 brass combination locks. Not one. 3. Her hand trembles as she lifts the walnut box, the last thing he ever made for her. She peels back the felt, 6 digits carved by her grandfather's hand. The wind stops. She reaches for the first lock. The rain came sideways that night, the kind of November rain that finds every seam in every jacket, in every crack, in every promise a person ever made to themselves about being fine. Wren Ashcombe was 19 years old, and she was not fine. She was standing at the edge of a pine forest 12 miles southeast of Garner, North Carolina, with $11 folded in the front pocket of a work jacket, 2 sizes too big for her, and a black dog with one folded ear pressed against the back of her knees, like he was trying to keep her from falling over. The jacket had a name stitched above the pocket. Ray. She had never met Ray. She had worked 4 days on a roofing crew back in September, and when the foreman handed out jackets from a bin in the back of a truck, this was the one she got. Ray was somebody else's ghost. Wren had been wearing him ever since. She could see her breath. It came out of her in short white clouds that the wind pulled apart before they finished forming. The dog's name was Juniper. She had not named him on purpose. He had shown up behind a gas station near the interstate on a hot afternoon in August, nosing at a sandwich wrapper she had pulled from a trash can, and when she tossed him a corner of bread, he sat down and looked at her with the kind of steadiness that most people never manage in a whole lifetime. He had been looking at her ever since. She had started calling him Juniper because there was a juniper bush by the gas station. That was all. Nothing more sacred than proximity. But sometimes proximity was enough. 2 years earlier, she had a room, a bed with a quilt her grandfather bought at a church rummage sale for $6, a kitchen that smelled like coffee at 6 in the morning and sawdust by noon. She had a life that made sense, and then her grandfather died, and everything that came after was just one thing falling away after another, the way a rotten porch railing goes board by board until there is nothing left to hold on to. Her grandfather's name was Thaddeus Ashcombe. Everybody called him Thad. He was 74 years old the year he died, and he had raised Wren from the age of 7, which was the year her father, Beckett Ashcombe, packed a duffel bag and drove to Charlotte and told Wren he would be back in a few weeks. She had waited by the front window for 3 days. On the 4th morning, Thad sat her down at the kitchen table and poured her a glass of orange juice, which was unusual because Thad did not believe in juice before lunch. He said her daddy loved her, but he did not know how to stay, and that was his problem and not hers. And here was what they were going to do. She was going to live here. She was going to eat breakfast before school every single morning. And on Saturdays, the two of them were going to build things. She had not fully understood what was happening at 7 years old, but she had understood the juice. It meant the conversation was serious. She asked him what kind of things they were going to build, and he said whatever needed building. And for the next decade, that was the deal, and Thad kept every part of it. He taught her woodworking the way another grandfather might have taught her piano. He said her hands were better than most men's because women's hands were made for precision. And precision was the only thing that separated a chair somebody would sit in for 40 years from a chair somebody would break down for firewood in 2. He said that in a voice that did not invite argument. He said a lot of things in a voice that did not invite argument, and Wren learned to listen because Thad did not waste breath. The workshop behind the house was where they spent their Saturdays. It was open on one side in the summer, and Thad had built the workbench himself, 8 feet of solid maple, with a wooden vise clamped to one end. Tools hung on a pegboard arranged by type and size handles, worn smooth from a lifetime of being held. He taught her to sand with the grain to measure twice to let a piece of wood sit for a day before cutting it, because wood moved when it wanted to, and you did not get a vote. He told her once, holding two pieces of oak that she had been trying to hammer together, that you did not force a joint. If it did not fit, you shaved it down. You tried again. You never hit it harder. She remembered that. She remembered most of what he told her because Thad did not speak unless he meant something. But the workshop was not the mystery. The mystery was in the woods. Behind the house, past the workshop, past the garden where Thad grew tomatoes and yellow squash, there was a path that ran through pine trees for about a quarter mile before it opened up into a clearing. And in that clearing, standing 8 meters tall against the sky, was a wooden chapel. Not a church exactly. Nobody worshipped there. Nobody had ever worshipped there. But it looked like a chapel from the outside, the kind of small Appalachian 19th century sanctuary you might find on a postcard from the mountains, with a peaked roof of cedar shingles, gone dark with weather and moss, and a small bell tower at the peak with no bell inside it. The walls were vertical planks of oak silvered by decades of rain. Stained glass windows on the sides had been boarded up from the inside, and you could just barely see the color of them through the gaps in the boards, deep reds and greens and blues that caught the light at odd hours and threw it back changed. The front door was made of solid white oak, 3 meters high, and it was carved with a pattern of overlapping leaves that ran from the bottom of the door to the top, so intricate that you could stand there for 10 minutes and still find a leaf you had not noticed before. 3 brass locks were mounted on the door at 3 different heights. Not padlocks, recessed locks with keyholes for 6-digit brass combination, dials the kind you might find on an old bank vault. One near the top, one in the middle, one near the bottom. Around the chapel was a wooden fence, mostly rotted now, and a sign hanging on the fence, hand-carved from a slab of walnut. The letters had gone gray with time, but you could still read them. Do not enter. Ophelia's sanctuary. Ophelia was Wren's grandmother. She had died before Wren was born. Wren had never met her. She only knew her from the 2 photographs on the mantelpiece and from the way Thad said her name, which was the way some people say a prayer. Wren had asked Thad about the chapel once when she was 12. He had looked at her for a long time, not angry, just measuring something she could not see. He had said, "That's yours when you're ready," not before. She had asked when she would be ready, and he had said, "You'll know. And if you don't know, then that means you're not." She had not asked again. Thad died on a Wednesday afternoon in September of 2023. Heart attack. He was in the garden, straightening a tomato cage, and Ilse Vermeer from a quarter mile down the road found him with his hands still on the wire. He had been dead for at least an hour by the time anyone noticed. Wren was in 10th period English. She came home to an ambulance in the driveway, and Ilse standing on the porch with her face in her hands. The funeral was that Saturday. Her father, Beckett, showed up in a gray suit that pulled across the shoulders and smelled like aftershave and something sour underneath. He brought his older brother, Cormac Ashcombe, whom Wren had met exactly twice in her life. Cormac was thicker than Beckett, louder, the kind of man who slapped strangers on the back and called everybody buddy because he could not keep names straight. Cormac had visited Thad maybe 3 times in the last decade. All 3 times he had needed money. They sat in the front pew. Wren sat in the second row. Nobody asked her to move up. After the service, Cormac caught her in the parking lot. He put a heavy hand on her shoulder and squeezed. "Listen, buddy," he said. And she remembered thinking that she was not his buddy. She was his brother's daughter, but she did not say anything. "Your grandpa didn't leave a will," he said. "That means the estate goes through probate, and me and your dad are next of kin." He let that sit for a second. "We'll make sure you're taken care of." She was 17 years old. She did not know what probate meant. She found out fast. Within 2 weeks, Cormac had a locksmith change the locks on the house. Beckett cleared out Thad's bank accounts. The truck, a 1992 Ford that Thad had kept running through sheer stubbornness, and a standing account at the auto parts counter, was sold to a dealer in Raleigh for $1,200 cash. Wren never saw a dime. One afternoon, she came home from school, or what had been home, and found 3 cardboard boxes stacked on the front porch. Her clothes, her school things, a few books from her room. Cormac's business card was taped to the top box with a phone number written on the back and a note that said, "Call if you need anything." She did not call. She stayed with a friend from school for a while, slept on a pull-out couch in the basement, and tried to be quiet about it. After 3 weeks, the friend's mother sat her down and said she was sorry, she really was, but they just did not have the room. She gave Wren a $20 bill and told her she would pray for her. Wren said thank you and meant it. She stayed with another friend, then another. She finished her senior year sleeping on other people's couches, doing homework in the public library, because it was the only place with good light and no expectation that she leave by a certain hour. She graduated in June of 2024. Nobody was in the audience. The couches dried up after that. When you were not in school anymore, people stopped making room. By August, she was sleeping outside. She picked up work where she could find it: dishwashing, day labor. 4 days on a roofing crew that left her with a jacket that was not hers and blisters on both palms. Each job paid enough for food, but never enough for a room. That was when Juniper found her behind the gas station, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like something in the world had chosen to be near her. She kept the box through everything, through every couch, and every night on concrete, and every morning waking up colder than the one before. Wren kept the box Thad had made for her 16th birthday. Walnut, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. Dovetail joints so clean you had to run your finger along the seam to find where one piece met the other. Inside was Thad's pocket watch, which had not ticked since before she was born, but which Thad had called a piece of sentimental jurisdiction. That was Thad. He talked like that when he wanted you to remember something. The box was the last thing he had made for her. She would have traded everything else she owned before she traded that. On the night of November 14th, 2025, it rained. Not the kind of rain you could wait out under an overhang. The kind that blew sideways and found every gap in every shelter you thought was solid. By morning, her backpack was soaked through, her spare shirt, her socks, the paperback she had been reading for 3 weeks, and the box. She pulled the box out from the bottom of the pack and wiped it down with her sleeve. The wood was dark with water. The bottom had warped just slightly, pulling away from the base, and the felt lining Thad had glued along the inside had peeled away at one corner. She pressed it back down. It curled up again. She peeled it a little further, not to damage it, just to see how bad the water had gotten underneath. That was when she saw the numbers. 6 digits carved into the raw wood beneath the felt. Small, deliberate. Each number cut with the tip of a knife or a fine chisel. Wren knew her grandfather's handwriting better than her own. She had seen it on grocery lists in the margins of woodworking books, on the little labels Thad taped to jars of nails and screws in the workshop. These numbers were his, no question. 6 digits. The chapel had 3 combination locks. Each one took 6 digits. She sat in the rain and stared at the numbers until her hands were shaking. She told herself the shaking was from the cold. "Come on," she said to Juniper. The dog stood immediately. "We're going." The old Ashcombe property was 12 miles southeast, out past the edge of town, where the subdivisions ended and the 2-lane road started. Wren used to walk it on days she missed the school bus. That had been a different kind of walk. That had been walking toward a hot meal and her grandfather's voice telling her to wash her hands before dinner. She started down the road. Juniper kept pace beside her, head low, ears flat against the wind. The rain quit after the first hour, but the air turned sharp and cold, and her wet jeans stiffened at the knees. Cars passed in both directions, headlights sweeping across her without slowing. Nobody stopped. She had not expected them to. She reached the property a little after 10 at night. The house had new curtains in the windows and a car she did not recognize sitting in the driveway. Somebody else's light in the rooms where Wren used to eat dinner and watch the news with her grandfather. She did not stop. She did not look longer than she had to. She walked around the fence line through wet grass that soaked her shoes worse than the rain had, past the workshop shed, which was dark and seemed smaller than she remembered. Everything seemed smaller now, except the things that mattered. She took the path through the pines. The chapel was at the back of the lot on a narrow strip that ran along the tree line, separated from the rest of the property by a survey marker and decades of property law that Cormac apparently had never bothered to untangle. She had not been down this path in over 2 years, but her feet knew it. She could have walked it blindfolded. The chapel came out of the darkness the way a memory does all at once, and larger than she remembered. It was still there. The oak door with its carved leaves, the three brass locks, the peaked roof going up into the black sky, the bell tower with no bell, the stained glass boarded from the inside, the hand-carved sign on the rotted fence. Do not enter, Ophelia's sanctuary. Wren stood in front of the door. Juniper sat beside her, ears forward, watching the dark wood. She pulled the walnut box from her backpack, tilted it toward the faint glow leaking from the house windows 200 yards away, and read the numbers one more time. She reached for the top lock first because it was the highest, and something in her wanted to save the middle one for last. The dial was stiff. She had to grip it with both hands, left, right, left again, slow and careful the way Thad had taught her to do everything that mattered. She landed on the last number and felt a small, clean click beneath her thumb. The shackle released. Her breath caught. She moved to the middle lock, tried the same combination. Nothing. The dial turned smoothly, but there was no click. No release. She tried the bottom lock. Nothing. Two locks still held. One had opened. She stared at the door for a long moment. Then she pushed it just to see if maybe one lock was enough, if maybe the other two were decorative or old or somehow forgotten. The door did not move. Whatever mechanism ran through those three locks, it was designed so that all three had to release before the door would open. Thaddeus Ashcombe had wanted her to earn her way in 3 times. Wren almost laughed. The wind carried it away before it left her throat. She looked at the door. There was another way in. She was sure of it. Thad did not build anything with only one path. She walked around the side of the chapel, running her hand along the oak planks until she came to what she had noticed once before as a child and forgotten. A smaller side entrance, not much bigger than a closet door. Also locked, but with a simpler mechanism, just a heavy iron latch and a padlock. The padlock took a key, not a combination. But when she got close, she saw that the padlock was not locked. It was hanging in the hasp, unclosed, waiting. Thad had left it that way, on purpose. She would understand later that this was his way of saying, get in from the side first. Learn what's in the anteroom, then earn the rest. She lifted the padlock free. She pulled the iron latch. The side door creaked open, and from the darkness came a smell that stopped her where she stood. Sawdust. Clean, dry, undisturbed sawdust. And underneath it, linseed oil and something sweeter that might have been cedar. And under that, faint but unmistakable, the ghost of lavender. It hit her all at once, and her throat went tight because she knew that smell. It was the smell of Thad's hands after a Saturday in the workshop. It was the smell of the kitchen table where he used to set his coffee mug while the finish dried on whatever he had been building. And the lavender. The lavender she did not know. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a photograph on a mantelpiece rearranged itself, and she thought that was Ophelia. That was her grandmother. Juniper nosed past her into the dark. Wren stayed at the threshold for another few seconds, just breathing. Then she reached inside and felt along the wall for a switch. Found one. Flipped it. Nothing. The power had been cut a long time ago. She pulled her phone from her pocket. 2% battery. She turned on the flashlight and held it up. The beam swept a small room. An anteroom exactly like she had guessed. Maybe 10 feet by 10. And what was in it stopped her heart for a full second. Against the far wall was a small altar. Not a religious altar. A memorial. A low table of dark walnut, waist-high hand carved with the same overlapping leaf pattern as the front door running along its edges. On top of the altar sat 3 things. A framed photograph of a woman, a stack of envelopes tied with twine, and a rolled sheet of paper sealed with wax. Wren walked forward slowly. Juniper stayed at the door watching. The photograph was of a woman in her 30s, dark hair pulled back, a small smile, eyes that looked like Wren's own eyes looking back at her from a face she had never seen in color before. The two photos on the mantelpiece back at the house had been black and white and small and old. This one was larger and there was color in it, and Wren realized she was looking at her grandmother Ophelia Ashcombe for the first time in her life, the way she must have actually looked. Above the photograph, carved directly into the wall, were the dates: 1952 to 1983. 31 years old. That was how old Ophelia had been when she died. Wren had known that number in the way you know, a fact from a family conversation, but seeing it carved into wood by her grandfather's hand made it real in a way it had never been before. 31. Younger than Ilsa. Younger than most of the mothers of her friends. Younger someday soon than Wren herself would be. She reached for the stack of envelopes and lifted them carefully. 40 envelopes, maybe more, all in Thad's handwriting, all addressed to the same person, to Ophelia. She untied the twine and opened the top one. The paper inside was thin, folded twice, and dated in the corner in Thad's precise hand. August 4th, 1984, 1 year after her death. My Philia, the letter began. Wren read the first line and stopped. She could not read the rest yet. Her hands were not steady enough. She folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, retied the twine, and set the stack back on the altar exactly where she had found it. She picked up the rolled paper next. The wax seal was old and cracked. It broke when she touched it. She unrolled the paper on top of the altar, holding it flat with both hands. It was an architectural drawing, an elevation of the chapel, the front door with its carved leaves, the bell tower, the stained glass windows, every dimension marked in Thad's handwriting, every measurement carried out to the 16th of an inch. In the bottom right corner in a small neat rectangle was a title block. Ophelia's Sanctuary, designed for Ophelia Marie Ashcombe, beloved wife, groundbroken spring of 1984, to be completed in her memory. Below the title block, in smaller writing, in a hand that was not Thad's, was a single line. If we cannot build it together in this life, then build it for me and I will build the next one for you. The handwriting was different because it had been added by someone else. Wren stared at it for a long time before she understood. Ophelia had written that line, before she died, to Thad, as instruction. He had built this chapel because his wife told him to. He had spent 40 years building it because his wife had told him to, and he had never told anyone. Not his sons, not Wren, not the neighbors, not the town. He had gone into these woods on Saturdays and Sundays and holidays and hot August afternoons and cold February mornings, and he had built a sanctuary for a woman who had been dead for 40 years and nobody knew. Nobody except now Wren. Her phone screen dimmed. 2% became 1. Then the flashlight cut out and the anteroom went black. Wren stood in total darkness, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and linseed oil and lavender, and listened to her own heartbeat. Juniper came back and pressed against her leg. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She lowered herself to the floor of the anteroom. It was wooden, not concrete, and it was warmer than she expected. Juniper climbed halfway into her lap, which he had never done before because he was about 30 pounds too heavy for it. She did not push him off. She put her arms around him and sat there in the dark in a room that smelled like her grandparents' entire marriage. And for the first time since Thad died, she did not feel like she had nowhere left to go. She was already there. She woke to gray light coming through the crack of the side door and Juniper's cold nose against her cheek. Her neck was stiff and one side of her face had gone numb against the wooden floor. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. Her back popped in 2 places. The floor had done its work overnight, and she felt like she had aged about 10 years in her sleep. She stood and pushed the side door wide open. Morning light came in gray and damp, and for the first time she saw the anteroom clearly. It was more beautiful than she had realized in the dark. The altar was smaller than it had felt at night, but the carving on its edges was extraordinary. Every leaf had veins. Every vein had been cut individually with a small chisel and finished by hand. The photograph of Ophelia sat in a frame that Thad had also carved with a pattern of tiny stars running around the border. The stack of letters tied with their twine sat exactly where Wren had put them back. The architectural drawing had rolled itself up again during the night. Above the altar, in a place Wren had not seen with her flashlight, were two more things. A small brass plaque engraved with a date, November 15th, and below it in smaller letters, anniversary. Wren stared at the plaque. November 15th. That was today. That was this morning. That was the date exactly that she had opened the door. She did not know what anniversary that plaque referred to. She would find out later from the letters that it was the anniversary of the day Thad had first proposed to Ophelia in 1974. Standing outside a diner in downtown Garner, holding a ring he had carved himself out of a piece of sanded oak because he could not afford metal yet. He had made her a wooden ring, and she had said yes, and he had promised her he would buy her a real one someday. He had bought her the real one 4 years later. She had worn both. She had been buried with both. But Wren did not know any of that yet. She only knew that she had somehow, by luck or by grief or by whatever quiet grace her grandfather had built into his design, opened the door on the exact anniversary of a date that mattered. She turned from the altar and looked at the second thing. Hanging on the wall beside the plaque in a small wooden case with a glass front was a wooden ring. A ring carved from oak, sanded so smooth it caught the morning light like polished stone. Simple, no decoration, just a band. Wren looked at it for a long time. Then she heard footsteps on the wet grass outside. Juniper barked sharp and sudden, one single bark aimed at the side door. Wren looked up. A woman was standing at the edge of the doorway, backlit by the gray sky. She was short, white-haired, wearing a quilted jacket over a flannel shirt and rubber boots caked with mud. She had a canvas bag in one hand and a thermos in the other. "I thought I heard something out here last night," she said. "Figured it was either a raccoon or someone who belonged here." Wren did not say anything. She stood slowly and moved between the woman and the altar without meaning to, without thinking about it, the way you step in front of something sacred. The woman looked at her, then past her. Then her eyes moved slowly around the anteroom, taking in the altar, the photograph, the letters, the wooden ring in its case. Her face changed. She set the thermos and the bag down on the floor. "Oh, Thad," she said softly. Wren watched her. "You don't remember me, do you?" the woman said. "I'm Ilsa. Ilsa Vermeer. I live down the road. I was at the house when the ambulance came." It came back to Wren then. The porch. A woman with her face in her hands. The way she had said Wren's name back then, before she knew what to do with a 17-year-old whose grandfather had just died in a garden. "I remember," Wren said. Ilsa looked at the altar for a long time. She did not cross the threshold. She stayed at the doorway as if she understood that this was not her room to enter without being invited. "He built this," she said. "Finally." Not a question. "Yes," Wren said. "For your grandmother." "Yes." Ilsa shook her head slowly. 40 years, she said. 40 years he came out here. I used to see him walking through the trees on Saturday mornings and think he was going hunting. He never carried a gun. I never asked." She looked at Wren. "When did you eat last?" she said. "Yesterday morning." "I think." "That's not an answer," Ilsa said. She picked up the thermos and held it out. "Coffee, still hot. There's bread and cheese in the bag. Sit down." Wren sat down on the wooden floor of the anteroom with her back against the wall beside the altar, and Ilsa sat down across from her on the other side of the doorway, half inside and half out, and for the first time in 14 months, Wren ate food that had been made by somebody who wanted her to have it. Juniper lay down between them and put his chin on his paws and watched. Wren ate 3 slices of bread with cheese and drank 2 cups of coffee. Ilsa did not speak while she ate. She just watched in the way older women sometimes watch you with a patience that does not need anything from you in return. When Wren was done, Ilsa said, "How did you get in?" Wren told her about the box, about the numbers under the felt, about the top lock releasing, about the middle and bottom lock still holding, about the side door and the padlock hanging unlocked. Ilsa listened to all of it. Then she said, "So this is the anteroom." Wren nodded. "And the rest of the chapel is still locked." "Yes." Ilsa looked at the altar. She looked at the letters. She looked at the wooden ring in its case. Then she looked at Wren, and her eyes were sharp. "Then your grandfather wanted you to sit with this part first," she said, "before you saw the rest." Wren felt something press against her chest. "He wanted you to know who she was, before he showed you what he built for her." Wren looked at the photograph of Ophelia, at the small smile, at the eyes that looked like her own. "Yes," she said. Ilsa stood up slowly. She brushed off her jacket. "I have a spare room," she said. "It's small, but it's warm and the door locks and there's a bed in it. You can stay until you figure things out. You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. Your grandfather would come back from the dead and build me a coffin to match if I let his granddaughter sleep on wood when I've got an empty bedroom a quarter-mile down the road." Wren almost smiled. It had been a long time since her face had tried to do that. "He wouldn't build you a coffin," she said. "No," Ilsa agreed. "He would build me something useful first, then the coffin." She looked at the altar one more time. She did not step across the threshold, but she raised her hand in a small gesture halfway between a wave and a salute, and she said, "Hello, Ophelia. It has been a long time." Then she turned to Wren. "I will come back this afternoon with candles, because you are going to burn this place down trying to use your phone for light. My phone is dead. Then you definitely need candles." Ilsa walked back across the wet grass toward the road. Wren watched her go until she disappeared around the corner of the workshop shed. Juniper watched too, head tilted as if he were trying to decide whether this new person was something to worry about or something to follow. Then Wren was alone again in the anteroom. She turned back to the altar. She looked at the letters, 40 of them, maybe more. She untied the twine again, and this time she picked up the letter dated August 4th, 1984, and she unfolded it, and she read it all the way through. "My Ophelia," it began. "I finished the framing today. The bell tower is up. There will not be a bell in it because you told me not to put a bell in it, and I have not forgotten a single thing you told me in the last year of your life, and I will not forget the ones about this place either. The oak came from the Whitfield lot. They tore down the old barn, and I bought the timbers for $80 because nobody else wanted them. They are good timbers. You would like them. They smell like rain. I am going to build this the way we drew it. I know I said that already. I am saying it again because I need to hear myself say it. I miss you every hour, some hours worse than others. This afternoon was one of the bad ones. I sat on a stump and cried for 10 minutes, and then I got back up and I nailed a plank into the wall and I felt better. Work helps. You always said that. You said, Thad, when the world is too heavy, pick up a tool and shave a board. So I did. So I do. So I will. I love you. I will love you tomorrow. I will love you the day after. I will love you when this building has a roof, and I will love you when it has walls, and I will love you when it is finished. And then I will start it over in some other form because loving you is not a project I know how to finish. Yours, Thad. Wren read it twice, then she folded it, slid it back into the envelope, and pressed her hand flat against the stack. 40 letters. 40 years. She sat very still on the floor of the anteroom, with Juniper against her side, and the framed face of a grandmother she had never met, watching her from the altar and morning light coming in through the side door. And she thought about the 2 locks that were still closed. Her grandfather had left her a puzzle. He had also left her a woman she had never known. He had left her a marriage she had not been alive to witness. He had left her without saying it out loud, the beginning of an answer to a question she had been carrying since she was 7 years old. The question of what it meant to stay and what it meant to be stayed with, and what a person could build when they refused to stop loving somebody just because that person was no longer there to be loved. She closed her eyes. The rain had stopped. The pines outside were dripping. Somewhere in the distance, a truck passed on the county road, and she thought about how many hundreds of trucks had passed her grandfather over 40 years while he worked in these woods, and how not one of them had ever known what he was doing back here. She opened the letter dated August 4th again and read the last line one more time. Loving you is not a project I know how to finish. She folded the letter. She retied the twine. She stood up. Juniper stood too. She walked to the doorway of the anteroom and looked out at the pine trees and the wet grass and the gray sky over Ophelia's sanctuary, and she said out loud to nobody or to everybody who had ever built anything for a person they loved, I am going to open the other two locks. Then she stepped back inside, sat down beside the altar, and began to read the second letter. The second letter was dated September 12th, 1984. My Philia, the roof went on today. Marcus Kettering came out to help. He is the only one I told about this place, and I told him because I needed a second pair of hands on the cedar shingles, and because he owed me a favor from when I fixed his boy's crib the winter our own boys were small. He did not ask questions. He nailed shingles for 6 hours and drank coffee from a thermos, and then he shook my hand and said, Thad, you built her a chapel? And I said, no, I did not. I built her what she asked for. He did not press. He is a good man. He is dead now, 3 years dead, but he was a good man. Wren stopped reading. She looked up from the paper. Marcus Kettering. She knew that name. Not from Thad. From somewhere else. Somewhere much more recent. She thought about it for a moment. Then she remembered. Marcus Kettering was the man whose funeral she had attended 2 summers ago. A friend from school had asked her to come because the friend's mother had been Marcus's daughter, and they had needed a second row of mourners. Wren had gone in a borrowed dress. She had not known Marcus. She had shaken his daughter's hand and said the things you say. She had eaten a piece of pound cake in the church basement afterward. She had been sitting in that basement in a borrowed dress, eating pound cake, at the funeral of the only man on earth besides Thad who knew this chapel existed. She had not known. Nobody had told her. She folded the letter and set it back on the stack. Ilsa came back that afternoon as promised with a wool blanket and 4 candles and a small casserole dish wrapped in foil and a battery-powered lantern. I brought the lantern because I decided I do not want you burning down a 40-year-old chapel on my watch, Ilsa said, setting the lantern on the floor of the anteroom. The candles are for atmosphere. Wren thanked her. She did not know how to thank someone properly anymore. She had lost the muscle for it. But Ilsa did not seem to need any particular kind of thanks. She set everything down, looked around the anteroom one more time and said, Are you going to sleep here again tonight? Yes. Then I will bring you dinner at 6. You don't have to. I know, Ilsa said, and walked back through the pines. Wren spent the rest of the day reading letters. She did not read them all. She could not. Reading 40 letters written by a widower to his dead wife was not the kind of thing you did in one afternoon. It was the kind of thing you did in installments over weeks or months, the way you took medicine that was too strong to swallow all at once. She read 6 that afternoon. She learned that Thad had started the chapel in the spring of 1984, 10 months after Ophelia died of ovarian cancer. He had bought the timbers from a man named Whitfield who was tearing down a barn. He had drawn the plans himself using measurements Ophelia had written down in the last weeks of her life when she had known she was dying and had asked him to build her something. Not for me, she had said. I will not be here. For you. To have somewhere to go when you cannot stand the house. He had built it because his wife had told him to. He had built it slowly over decades because he could not bring himself to finish it. She read one letter dated Christmas Eve of 1991 in which Thad wrote about their sons. Beckett came by today. He is 15 and he is angry at everything, and I do not know how to talk to him. Cormac is 19 and he did not come by at all. He is running with a bad crowd in Charlotte. I worry about him. I worry about both of them. I do not think either of them is going to turn out to be the kind of man you and I hope they would be. I am sorry. I know that is not what you want to hear on Christmas Eve, but I do not know who else to tell. Wren read that letter 3 times. She was reading her father's story from the perspective of a man who had loved him and known 20 years before Wren was born that her father was going to break the promises he had not yet even made. She folded the letter. She thought about her father. She had not thought about him in a long time in any way that was not anger. She thought about him now at 15, angry at everything, standing in a house with a father who was writing letters to a dead wife in the woods on Saturdays, and she felt for a small moment something she had not felt in 2 years. Not forgiveness. She was not there. She would not be there for a long time and maybe not ever, but something like understanding. She set the letter on the stack. That night, Ilsa brought her a bowl of beef stew and a chunk of cornbread and made her eat it, sitting on the floor of the anteroom with the lantern between them. Ilsa did not stay long. She said goodnight and left the lantern. Wren slept better on the wooden floor of the anteroom than she had slept anywhere in 14 months. She woke the next morning knowing what she had to do. She had to open the second lock. She sat with the letters and the plans for most of the morning looking for clues. The chapel had been built to a plan. The plan had come from Ophelia. If Thad had hidden the first combination under the felt of the walnut box, then he had hidden the other two somewhere else. Somewhere she was supposed to find them if she was paying attention. Not hidden, just quiet. That was how he had done things. She looked at the architectural drawing, the elevation. She looked at the small notes in the margin. Measurements, angles, a list of materials. In the bottom right corner below the title block in Thad's small handwriting was a note she had not read carefully the first time. Cornerstone laid spring of 1984. Sea-stone, sea-stone. Wren stood up. She walked out of the anteroom and around the side of the chapel to the front, and she stood at the base of the oak door and looked at the foundation. It was fieldstone the whole way around, gray and moss-covered, laid in mortar that had gone soft at the seams over 40 years. Cornerstones were traditionally at the corner of a building. She walked to the northeast corner. She knelt down. She brushed away leaves and moss with her hand. There. A single stone larger than the others set flush with the corner. Carved into its face in letters that had gone faint but were still readable was a date. Spring 1984. Below the date, a smaller line. For OMA Ophelia Marie Ashcombe. And below that, 6 digits. Wren stared at the numbers. She wrote them down on the back of the architectural drawing. Then she stood up, walked back around to the front of the chapel, and tried them on the middle brass lock. Left, right, left again. Click. The middle shackle released. She stood there for a moment breathing. 2 locks open, 1 to go. She looked at the third lock, the bottom one. She did not know where the third combination was, but she thought she knew where to look. The letters. She went back into the anteroom and picked up the stack of envelopes. She did not read every letter. She scanned them looking for numbers. She found dates. She found measurements. She found ages. She found none of them in the pattern she needed. Then she came to a letter dated November 15th, 1994. Anniversary of the proposal. The letter was longer than the others. It was 3 pages. Wren read it slowly. My Philia. 20 years today. I have been thinking about the wooden ring. Do you remember? Of course you remember. I made it out of a piece of oak I had been saving because it had a knot in it that looked like a small moon. I could not afford metal. I told you I would replace it. You said, do not replace it. Wear the metal one on top of it. Wear both. And you did. You wore both for the rest of your life. You were buried with both. I put you in the ground with 2 rings on your finger, the wood on the bottom, the metal on top, because you told me to, and because I could not think of any other way to keep you together with me. I have carved a new one. I am putting it in the case in the anteroom. It is not the original. The original is with you. This one is for whoever finds this place. It is for them to know that a promise can be kept in wood. The date I proposed to you was November 15th, 1974. That is the 3rd combination. If someone reads this and needs it, that is the number. 11/15/74. Wren read the line 3 times. She looked at the case on the wall of the anteroom with the wooden ring inside it. Then she looked at her own hands, which were shaking, and she waited for them to stop. She walked out of the anteroom and around to the front of the chapel and knelt in front of the bottom lock. 11, 15, 74, left, right, left again. Click. The third shackle released. Wren stood up slowly. 3 locks, 3 combinations, 3 doorways her grandfather had built into a single door, because he had wanted whoever came through it to have earned it. She pulled all 3 padlocks free and set them on the ground beside the door. She put her hand on the iron latch. She pulled. The oak door swung outward, heavy on its hinges, silent, because Thad had greased the hinges every winter for 40 years, and the last greasing was less than 3 years old, and she stepped inside. The main room of the chapel opened up before her. For a full 10 seconds, she could not move. The interior was larger than the exterior had suggested. 25 feet wide, 30 feet long, 2 stories high, with a vaulted ceiling of exposed cedar beams running up to a peak. Along both side walls were the stained glass windows, boarded from the inside, as she had seen from the outside, but now in the light coming through the open door behind her, she could see the boards clearly, and she understood that they were not there to hide the windows from vandals. They were there to protect the workshop from direct sunlight, which would have faded the wood and warped the finishes. Because the main room of the chapel was a workshop, not a small workshop, not a hobby workshop, the workshop of a master. Along the entire back wall ran a pegboard. It was 30 feet long and 8 feet high, and every square inch of it was covered in tools. Chisels of every size arranged smallest to largest. Hand planes 20 or more each in its own outline slot, each labeled in Thad's handwriting. Saws hanging by their handles. Clamps on wooden rails sorted by length. Marking gauges, squares, levels, mallets, files, rasps, whetstones, sharpening jigs. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. The pegboard looked like a museum exhibit of the tools of a life. In the center of the room stood a workbench, 12 feet long, maple. 2 wooden vices, one at each end. Storage drawers built into the frame. A leather-bound journal lying on the surface with a carpenter's pencil across it. And along the sides of the room, arranged carefully, were shapes under canvas drop cloths. Wren counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 shapes. 6 pieces of furniture waiting under canvas the way she had imagined but never quite believed. She walked into the room slowly. Her boots made small, soft sounds on the wooden floor. Juniper walked beside her, ears forward, tail low, as if he understood that this was a place where you did not raise your voice. She walked to the first shape and put her hand on the canvas. She pulled it back. A rocking chair. Walnut. Dark smooth with arms that curved down to gentle points and runners that swept back in a single clean line from the legs. The seat was scoop-shaped to fit a body. She put her hand on the armrest and ran her fingers along the surface. It was cool and so perfectly sanded that she could not feel where the grain ended and the finish began. She had never touched a piece of furniture that felt like this. The Saturday workshop, pieces the birdhouses and cutting boards, and the small shelf they had built together for the kitchen, those were good. Those were Saturday morning good. This was something else entirely. She pulled the next canvas, a dining table. Oak, at least 7 feet long with 4 legs as thick as her forearm and a top made from a single wide board. The grain ran the full length of the table without a break or a seam like it had come from a tree that had grown with this exact table already inside it. She kept going. 4 ladder-back chairs, woven rush seats, every joint flush, simple, honest, elegant. A writing desk in cherry wood, darker at the edges, where the grain was tightest with a fold-down surface, and 2 drawers with brass pulls that were cold to the touch. A hope chest, cedar. The front panel was carved with a pattern of overlapping leaves, the same pattern as the front door, the same pattern as the edges of the altar in the anteroom. The same pattern Thad had drawn on a napkin for Wren once when she was 10, sitting at the kitchen table explaining how to carve a relief without cutting too deep. She had forgotten the lesson. She had not forgotten the napkin. 6 pieces, every one of them made by hand, every joint tight, every surface smooth, every line deliberate. These were not Saturday projects. These were not the work of a man filling his weekends. These were the work of a man who had spent decades at a level of craft that most people never even encountered in their lives. Wren went back to this pegboard and lifted a chisel from its hook. It was heavier than the ones in the workshop shed behind the house. The handle was rosewood fitted to the blade with a brass ferrule, and the edge was still sharp enough that she could feel the bite when she ran her thumb across the flat side. She remembered a Saturday when she was 11. They had been building a birdhouse. 4 walls, a peaked roof, a round hole for the entrance. Nothing fancy. Wren had rushed through the cuts, and the joints were sloppy. One corner had a visible gap where the side panel did not quite meet the front. Thad had looked at it, then he had looked at her. "Take it apart," he had said. "It's fine," she had said. "The birds aren't going to care." Maybe not, he had said, but you will. Every time you look at that thing, you will see the gap and know you could have done better. He had picked up a square and set it against the joint. "You see this, off by about a 16th of an inch. Sand the edge, just the edge. Take your time." She had sanded the edge. It had taken 20 minutes. When she had set the piece back, the joint was flush. "Now it is a birdhouse," he had said. That birdhouse had hung from a branch outside the kitchen window until the day Thad died. Wren had looked at it every morning while she ate her cereal. The gap was gone. He had been right. She would have seen it every single time. She put the chisel back on its hook, fitting it into its black outline slot. Then she walked to the workbench and picked up the leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked and softened from years of handling. The pencil lying across it was a carpenter's pencil, flat-sided so it would not roll off the bench. She opened to the first page. Thad's handwriting. Neat, slanted slightly right, the letters pressed deep into the paper. "If you are reading this, Wren, then I am gone, and you found the combinations. Good. That means you were ready, even if it does not feel like it yet. I wrote this journal for you, not all at once, over a lot of years. Some of it is about wood, some of it is about other things, but mostly it is the things I wished I had more Saturdays to teach you. Start with the chisel cabinet. Second shelf, left side. There is a set of Japanese water stones I want you to learn to use. You will wreck the first one. That is fine. There are 3 more behind it." She closed the journal and held it in both hands. She could hear his voice in the words. The same voice that had told her to sand the birdhouse joint. The same voice that had sat her down with orange juice and said, "Your daddy loves you, but he does not know how to stay." She opened the journal again. She turned the pages slowly. Each entry was a lesson. How to sharpen a plane blade. How to read grain direction before making a cut. How to tell the difference between heartwood and sapwood by color and by weight. How to check a joint for square without a square using only your eyes and the way light falls on a corner. Between the lessons were notes, shorter, personal. Your grandmother designed the leaf pattern. She drew it in 1979, 3 years before she got sick. She said she wanted every piece of furniture we ever made together to have that pattern on it somewhere. I have kept my end of that bargain. Every piece you find in this chapel has the leaf pattern on it somewhere. Look on the underside of the tabletop. Look inside the drawer of the writing desk. Look at the back of the hope chest. She is on every one of them. Wren went to the dining table. She got down on the floor and looked at the underside of the tabletop. There. Small. Carved into the wood in a place nobody would look unless they were looking on purpose. A leaf. She checked the writing desk. Inside the top drawer on the underside of the drawer, face carved into the cherry. A leaf. She checked the hope chest. She lifted the lid and looked at the inside of the back panel. A leaf. She checked the rocking chair. On the bottom of the seat, invisible from any angle a person would sit at. A leaf. She stood up. Her hands were shaking again. She was going to have to get used to that, she thought. Her hands were going to shake for a while. Ophelia had designed the pattern. Thad had built the pieces. Ophelia had died before she could work with him. He had carved her mark into everything he built for the next 40 years, so that when someone finally opened this chapel and saw what he had made, they would know that he had not made it alone. He had made it with her. Wren went back to the journal. She read for another hour. She learned that Thad had started carving the leaf pattern into commercial pieces too. The furniture he had built for people in the community over the decades, the things they thought were just Thad's kindness or Thad's craftsmanship, all of them had a small leaf carved somewhere on the underside. The porch railing he had rebuilt for Helen Parker in 1992. The kitchen cabinets he had put in for the Henderson family in 2001. The cradle he had built for their first baby that same year. Ophelia was on all of it, everywhere in the county, in 100 houses, on 100 pieces of wood. Nobody had ever known. Wren sat down on the floor of the workshop with her back against the leg of the workbench, and Juniper lay down beside her, and she put her head in her hands, and she did not cry because she had learned 2 years ago that crying was expensive and did not solve anything. But she sat there for a long time with her head in her hands, breathing. She heard footsteps outside. She looked up. Ilse was standing in the doorway of the chapel holding a paper bag. "I brought lunch," Ilse said. Then she looked past Wren, and her breath caught. She did not step inside. She did not cross the threshold. She stood in the doorway with the paper bag in her hand, and she looked at the pegboard at the workbench at the pieces of furniture uncovered around the room. Her eyes moved slowly. "Oh, Thad," she said again. Wren stood up. Ilse looked at her. "Do you understand what these are?" she said. "He built them," Wren said. "Yes, he did. But this is not hobby work, Wren. A man's hands do not lie. You can see his whole life in what he built." She looked at the rocking chair. "This is the work of a master. Your grandfather was a master, and he never told a soul. He told Marcus Kettering," Wren said. Ilse's head turned sharply. "Marcus Kettering, yes. It's in the letters. Marcus helped him with the roof and never told anyone." Ilse closed her eyes for a moment. "That old fox," she said quietly. "That old sweet fox. He came to my kitchen 100 times over 30 years, and he never once told me. He was keeping a promise." "I know. I know he was." Ilse opened her eyes. "There is a man in town you should talk to," she said. "He runs a furniture shop on Main Street. His name is Rutherford Pike. He has been dealing in handmade pieces for as long as I can remember. If anyone can tell you what these are worth, it is Rutherford." Wren borrowed Ilse's truck that afternoon and drove one of the ladderback chairs into town. Rutherford Pike's shop was a long, low building with a hand-painted sign that said, "Pike Fine Woodwork," and a front window crowded with tables and bookcases, and a tall clock that ticked audibly even from the sidewalk. Wren carried the chair inside. The bell over the door rang. Rutherford was behind a workbench refinishing a dresser. He was maybe 60, lean with sawdust on his sleeves and reading glasses on top of his head. He looked up when the bell rang. "Help you." "I have a chair my grandfather built," Wren said. "I was told you might know something about it." Rutherford set down his sandpaper and came around the bench. He took the chair from her and set it on the floor without saying anything. Then he crouched beside it. He pressed the joints with his thumbs. He tipped the chair at an angle and sighted down the legs. He ran his hands over the rush seat, testing the weave. He turned the chair around and examined the back, each rung, each rail, the way the wood met at every junction. He did all of this slowly, like a man reading something in a language he had not seen for a long time. Then he turned the chair upside down, and he ran his fingers along the underside of the seat and along the underside of one of the stretchers until he found what he was looking for. He went very still. "Where did you get this?" he said. His voice was different now, quieter. "My grandfather's chapel. He made it." Rutherford looked up. "Your grandfather was TA, I guess so." Yes. Rutherford stood up slowly. He took off his glasses and set them on the bench. He looked at Wren for a long moment, then back at the chair, then at Wren again. "How many pieces do you have?" he said. "6 in the main room, a rocking chair, a dining table, 4 chairs like this one, a writing desk, a hope chest, plus a full workshop of tools, all by the same hand, all by my grandfather." Rutherford walked behind his counter and came back with a thick catalog with glossy pages. He opened it to a section near the back and turned it toward her. Photographs of furniture, a side table with turned legs, a small jewelry box with a curved lid, a coat rack with clean, simple hooks. "These are TA pieces," Rutherford said. "This catalog is from Sotheby's. Last spring, that side table sold for $28,000. The jewelry box went for $9,000. I have been in this business most of my life. I have handled 3 TA pieces. Each one was the finest thing in my shop at the time, and nobody has known who TA was. Nobody has known if he was still alive. There is a rumor in the trade that he was dead. There is another rumor that he was a woman. There is a third rumor that he was a syndicate of Amish woodworkers in Pennsylvania. Everybody has a theory. Nobody has ever met him. Nobody. $28,000, Wren said. For a side table. Yes. Rutherford looked at the ladder-back chair on his floor. This chair alone with provenance could go for $8,000 or $9,000. Maybe more. The set of 4 together would fetch closer to 40. The dining table by itself, depending on condition, could bring 60. The rocking chair 30. The writing desk 40. The hope chest, if the carving is what I think it is, 50. He paused. "Do not sell any of these without me. Not because I will give you the best price, because I will make sure they go to the right places, and because I will make sure your grandfather gets his name back." Wren did not say anything. Rutherford set the catalog down. "Do you know why he signed the pieces TA? Because his name was Thaddeus Ashcombe." "Yes. But he could have signed them Thaddeus Ashcombe. He chose the initials." "Do you know why?" She shook her head. "Because he did not do the design work alone." Wren looked at him. "The leaf pattern," Rutherford said. "It is on every piece that has come through the trade. Every single one. The 3 I handled and the ones I have only seen in catalogs. Every TA piece has a small carved leaf hidden somewhere on it. That leaf is not his signature. That is her signature." "Whose?" "I do not know whose. Nobody in the trade knows. There has been speculation for 20 years. Some people think it is a wife. Some people think it is a daughter. Some people think it is a mother. But everybody agrees the leaf belongs to a woman, because the leaf is drawn the way a woman would draw it. There is a delicacy in it that the rest of the piece does not have. The piece is his hand. The leaf is hers." Wren stood in the shop and she thought about the photograph of Ophelia on the altar in the anteroom of the chapel. And she thought about the line written on the architectural drawing in a handwriting that was not Thad's. And she thought about 40 years of letters written to a dead woman by a man who had not stopped loving her. And she thought about the small carved leaf on the underside of the tabletop of the dining table, and she said out loud in a voice she did not entirely recognize, "The leaf was my grandmother's." Rutherford Pike looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she did not expect. He took off his cap. He held it in both hands, and he inclined his head just slightly, the way a man might in the presence of something he had been waiting his whole life to meet. "Then Ophelia Ashcombe," he said, "it is an honor to have known your work." Wren drove back to the chapel that afternoon with the ladder-back chair in the truck bed and her hands loose on the wheel because she did not entirely trust them to grip anything. She parked at the edge of the pines and carried the chair through the woods and set it back in its place among the others in the main room. Then she sat down at the workbench and opened the journal, and she read a passage she had not read yet. "I want you to know something, Wren, because I did not know how to tell you when I was alive. Your grandmother did not have to teach me to love her. That part was easy, but she taught me how to build furniture. She was the one with the eye. I was the one with the hands. For the first 10 years of our marriage, we did it together. She would draw, I would cut. She would sand and finish, I would join. We built everything as a pair. Then she got sick. Then she died. And I kept building the way she had taught me. And I kept signing the pieces T.A. because if I had signed them T. Ashcombe, that would have been a lie. It was never me. It was always us. It is always going to be us. I did not tell your father or your uncle about the leaf. They did not care about the workshop. They did not care about her. They were angry at her for dying. I understood the anger. I had it too. But I could not spend the rest of my life sharing her with people who did not love her. So I put her in the wood where only somebody who was really looking would find her. You are somebody who is really looking. That is why I left you the combinations. That is why you are reading this. Wren closed the journal. She stood up from the workbench. She walked over to the rocking chair and knelt beside it and turned it upside down, resting it gently on its arms, so the underside of the seat faced up. She ran her fingertips across the wood the way Thad had taught her to check a surface, slowly, letting her skin do what her eyes could not. Near the back edge of the seat where the seat met the rear support rail, she stopped. There was a section of wood that felt different, the same color, the same grain direction, but the texture was a fraction smoother than the surrounding surface. She leaned closer. In the light from the doorway, she could just barely see it. A hairline seam no wider than a pencil mark, forming a rectangle about the size of a playing card. She pressed it with her thumb. The panel shifted. She pressed again harder and it popped free on a tiny brass hinge, swinging downward to reveal a cavity in the seat no deeper than an inch. Inside was a key. Brass, small, darkened with age. Solid. Wren held the key in her palm. She looked around the room. The rocking chair, the dining table, the writing desk, the hope chest, the pegboard. The key belonged to something. She checked the writing desk first. She opened both drawers. Empty. She checked the storage drawers of the workbench. Empty. Then she saw it. Pushed against the back wall, half hidden behind a fold of canvas that she had not pulled aside, was a metal box. Gray steel, about the size of a shoebox. Heavy when she picked it up. A small keyhole on the front. She sat down on the floor of the chapel. She set the box on her knees. She put the key in the lock and turned it. It opened with a clean click. Inside were three things: a folded document on heavy paper with a blue legal cover, a small brown bank book with a rubber band around it, and a sealed white envelope with her name on the front, in Thad's handwriting. Wren Elizabeth Ashcombe. She opened the document first. It was a deed, 3 acres of land with a cabin on County Road 14, about 20 minutes north of Garner. Purchased in 2013. Held in a trust. Trustee, a law firm in Raleigh. Beneficiary: Wren Elizabeth Ashcombe. She slid the rubber band off the bank book. A credit union she had never heard of. Joint account: Thaddeus Ashcombe and Wren Ashcombe. Deposits going back years. Small and regular like clockwork. $20 here, $30 there, $50 on a good month. The last entry was dated about 2 months before Thad died. The balance was $47,211. Wren read the number. She read it again. Her hands were shaking and she set the bank book down on her knees so she would not drop it. She picked up the envelope. She slid her thumb under the flap. She pulled out 2 folded sheets of paper. She unfolded them. Dear Wren, if you are reading this, then things went the way I thought they would, and I am sorry about that. I hoped I was wrong about your father and your uncle, but I had known them a long time, and hope is not the same thing as evidence. Here is what is in this box. The deed is for 3 acres with a cabin on County Road 14. I bought the land with cash in 2013 and put it in a trust in your name. Your father does not know about it. Your uncle does not know about it. Nobody does except the lawyer who wrote the papers and me. And now you. The bank book is yours. The account has been in your name since you were 12. I put money in every month for 7 years. Not a lot each time, but steady money adds up when you leave it alone. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to start. Now here is the part I need you to hear, because it is the only thing in this box that matters. I did not leave you money, Ren. I left you hands. The money will get spent. That is what money does. The cabin will need fixing. But the tools on that pegboard and the lessons in this journal are yours forever. Nobody can take a skill away from you. Nobody can file a claim on what you know how to do with a piece of wood and a sharp chisel. I watched your father and your uncle for a long time. I saw who they were becoming. I knew what they would do when I was gone. They would take the house and the truck and whatever else was easy to carry. That is who they are. I could not change them, but I could make sure they did not get everything. They took what they could see, kiddo. I saved what they could not. Learn the trade. Use the tools. Build something. Start with something small and get it right. Then build something bigger. That is all I ever wanted to tell you, and I ran out of Saturdays to say it. I love you. I should have said it more. I figured the birdhouses and the Saturday mornings said it well enough. But a man should not leave that kind of thing to guesswork. Now go sharpen the number 4 chisel. The edge has been sitting too long. Thad. There was one more line added at the bottom in a slightly different pen, as if he had come back to it later. P.S. Look inside the hope chest. Second envelope. Do not open it until you are ready. You will know when you are ready. If you are not ready, do not open it. Some things wait. Wren read the postscript 3 times. She folded the letter. She put it back in its envelope. She set the envelope on the floor of the chapel beside the metal box. Then she stood up. Juniper stood too. He had been lying at her feet the whole time. He was watching her now, ears up, waiting to see what came next. Wren walked to the hope chest. She knelt in front of it. She put her hands on the lid. She looked at the leaf carving on the front panel, the one Ophelia had designed, and she thought about the small leaf hidden inside the chest that meant her grandmother's hand had shaped this piece too. And she thought about Thad's postscript, and she thought about the $11 still folded in her front pocket from a night that already felt like a year ago. She lifted the lid of the hope chest. Inside, on top of a folded piece of linen, was a single white envelope. It was addressed in a handwriting that was not Thad's. The handwriting was Lorraine's, her mother's. Wren knew this because her mother had written her name inside the front cover of a picture book once when Wren was 4, and Wren had kept that book for almost 2 years before it had been left in a laundromat in a bag of things she could not carry anymore. And she had memorized the shape of those letters before she had lost the book. The envelope was addressed to her, Miss Wren Elizabeth Ashcombe. She did not open it. She sat on the floor of the chapel in front of the open hope chest with her mother's handwriting on an envelope in her hand and her grandfather's ghost in every corner of the room and the smell of sawdust and linseed oil and lavender still in the air. And she thought, I am not ready. She set the envelope back inside the hope chest. She closed the lid. She stood up. Outside, the light was starting to go. She could hear a wind pushing through the pine tops, and Juniper's ears twitched at it, and she thought about the third and last thing Thad had left her still folded in the metal box, still waiting. And she thought about the fact that her mother, who had walked out of her life when she was 4 years old and had never come back and had never called and had never sent a birthday card, had written her a letter that had been sitting in a hope chest in a locked chapel in the woods for nobody knew how long. She was not ready. She would be ready. Just not yet. For 3 days, Wren did not open the envelope. She left it inside the hope chest under the folded piece of linen where she had found it, and she closed the lid and she did not lift it again. She told herself she was not ready. She told herself that some things waited the way Thad had written. She told herself a lot of things in those 3 days, and most of them were true, and none of them were the whole truth. The whole truth was that she was afraid. Her mother's name was Lorraine. That was almost everything Wren knew about her. Lorraine had left when Wren was 4 years old. She had walked out on a Tuesday morning in the summer of 2010, and she had not come back. Wren remembered almost nothing about her, only a smell of shampoo that she had never been able to name, and a coat that had been read and a voice singing something at a kitchen sink. That was all. 4 years of a mother reduced to 3 sensory fragments. Beckett had told her when she was old enough to ask that Lorraine had left because she did not want to be a mother anymore. He had said it the way you say a fact you are done examining. He had not looked at Wren when he said it. He had been standing at the kitchen counter making a sandwich, and he had said, "Some women are not built for it, kiddo." And that is what happened, and that is all there is to it. And Wren had accepted the sentence because she had been 6 years old and she had not known what else to do with it. And then Beckett had left too a year later, so it turned out that some men were not built for it either. Wren had spent the next 12 years believing her mother had walked away because she did not want her. That belief had done things to her. It had made her quiet in ways she did not always understand. It had made her cautious about who she let close to her. It had made her at 19 sleeping under an overpass with a black dog and $11 in her pocket, not able to imagine a version of her own life in which someone stayed on purpose. And now in a hope chest in a chapel in the woods was an envelope in her mother's handwriting. Wren was not ready to find out what it said. She spent those 3 days working. Ilsa had given her the spare room and Wren slept there at night, but during the day she was at the chapel. She swept the workshop floor. She wiped down the pegboard. She took out each tool one at a time and examined it and put it back in its outlined slot. She read the journal in small pieces. She started to work. On the second morning, she sharpened the number 4 chisel. It took her 40 minutes. The Japanese waterstones were exactly where Thad had said they would be, on the second shelf left side of the chisel cabinet. She wrecked the first stone exactly as he had predicted. There were 3 more behind it. She used the second one properly, working the blade in slow, small circles, the way the journal explained, feeling for the burr on the back of the edge, flipping the chisel, working the burr off, feeling for the sharpness that came at the exact moment the burr let go. When she was done, the edge would shave the hair on her forearm. She tested it on a scrap of oak from a bin under the workbench. The chisel took a curl of wood off the surface as thin as tissue paper. She put the chisel back on its hook. She sat down at the workbench and cried for the first time since Thad had died. Not for long, maybe 2 minutes. Not because the chisel was sharp, because he had been right about the stones and right about the wrecking of the first one and right about everything else he had ever told her. And there was nobody left to tell that to. Juniper put his head on her knee and waited. Then it passed, and she went back to work. On the third morning, Beckett came. She was in the workshop when she heard the truck pull up outside. She looked through the open door of the chapel and saw it. Cormac's truck. Silver. Newer than anything else on the county road. Cormac got out from the driver's side. Beckett climbed out of the passenger seat, slower, looking at the ground. They walked toward the chapel through the pines. Cormac stopped at the doorway and looked inside. His eyes moved over the pegboard, the workbench, the furniture standing uncovered in the corner. His face changed. It went from curiosity to recognition to something harder in about 3 seconds. "What is all this?" he said. "Furniture my grandfather built," Wren said. She had set down the plane she had been reading about and stood up from the workbench, but she did not walk toward him. She stayed where she was. Cormac stepped inside without asking. He walked to the dining table and put his hand on it. Not gently. He pressed down like he was testing the weight. "This was supposed to go through probate," he said. "Everything Thad owned was supposed to go through probate. This did not. The chapel and its contents are held in a trust," Wren said. "Separate from the estate." "A trust." Cormac's voice went flat. "What trust?" "A legal trust set up in 2013 with a law firm in Raleigh. I am the named beneficiary. It covers the chapel, the land under it, and everything inside. He set this up behind our backs. He set it up in a lawyer's office with witnesses and notarized signatures," Wren said. "Nothing was behind anyone's back. You just did not know about it." Cormac turned from the table and looked at her. "Show me." She walked to the metal box on the workbench and pulled out the trust document and handed it to him. He read the first page. He flipped to the second. His jaw tightened. And the land on County Road 14, he said. Same trust, same beneficiary. And the account. That is mine too. Cormac set the document down on the workbench with more force than necessary. I will have a lawyer look at this. That is your right. Cormac looked around the chapel one more time. At the rocking chair, the hope chest, the tools on the wall. Wren could see him adding numbers in his head, trying to calculate what he had missed, what Thad had kept from him for decades. This is a lot of money sitting in a workshop, he said. It is not money, Wren said. It is furniture. Cormac stared at her. Then he turned and walked out. Beckett had been standing by the door the entire time. He had not said a word. Wren looked at her father, and her father looked back. Beckett was thinner than he had been at the funeral. His face had the unfinished quality of a man who had stopped taking care of things, starting with himself. Something moved behind his eyes. He opened his mouth. Wren waited. He closed his mouth. He put his hands back in his pockets and followed Cormac to the truck. Wren listened to the engine start and the tires crunch over the gravel. When the sound faded, she realized her hands were shaking. She looked down at them. Steady hands were one of the things Thad had given her, but not right now. Right now they were shaking because she had just stood in front of the two men who had taken everything from her and told them no. She sat down on the floor of the chapel. Juniper came over and pressed against her side. 10 minutes later, Ilsa's truck pulled up. Ilsa walked into the chapel carrying a thermos and a paper bag. I saw Cormac's truck heading back toward town, she said. She set the thermos on the workbench and looked at Wren. How bad? He wants a lawyer. He can have one. That trust was drawn up by a real firm. Thad did not cut corners on the things that mattered. She sat down on an overturned crate by the door. How are you doing? I am fine. You are shaking. I am fine, Ilsa. Ilsa was quiet for a minute. She poured Wren a cup of coffee and handed it to her. Wren held it in both hands and the warmth helped. You do not have to forgive them, Ilsa said. I want to be clear about that. What they did to you after Thad died, that was wrong, and nobody with any sense would tell you to get over it. She paused. But you cannot build anything steady with fists, Wren. Anger is useful for a while. It gets you through the door. But if it is the only tool you pick up, everything starts looking like something that needs tearing down. Wren did not say anything. She drank the coffee. Juniper put his head on her knee. Your grandfather was not angry, Ilsa said. He saw what was coming, and he built something instead. He did not fight them. He just made sure they could not take the parts that mattered. She stood up. That is the move. Build. Do not fight. You have the tools, and you have the hands. Use them. She left the thermos and drove home. Wren sat in the chapel for a while after she left. The light was going. She lit a candle and opened the journal to a page near the end that she had not read yet. Your father stopped calling me after I refused the loan. That was fine. I used the quiet to finish the writing desk. It came out better than anything I had built before. Funny how that works. You take the noise away and the work gets clearer. She read it twice. Then she closed the journal, picked up a piece of scrap oak from the workbench, and set the chisel against the grain. She made one cut, then another, clean and steady. That night, back at Ilsa's, Wren lay in the spare bed for a long time and stared at the ceiling. She thought about her mother. She thought about the envelope in the hope chest. She thought about a woman she did not remember who had written her name on an envelope in a handwriting Wren had memorized at 4 years old. She got out of bed. She put on her jacket. She whistled softly for Juniper. She walked the quarter-mile back to the property in the dark through the pines to the chapel. She opened the door. She lit a candle on the workbench. She walked to the hope chest and she lifted the lid. She took out the envelope. She sat down on the floor of the chapel with her back against the hope chest, and Juniper lay down beside her, and she opened the envelope. There were 3 pages inside, all in the same handwriting. The first page was dated May 17th, 2013. My daughter, it began. Wren's breath caught. I do not know when you will read this. I do not know if you will ever read this. Your grandfather has told me that he will find a way to make sure you do someday when you are old enough to hold what is inside it. He has promised me that, and I believe him, because he is the only person in this family who has ever kept a promise to me. I did not leave you, Ren. I want you to read that sentence again. I want you to read it as many times as you need to. I did not leave you. I was forced out. Ren stopped reading. She could not breathe for a moment. She pressed her hand flat against the letter and closed her eyes. Juniper watched her not moving. She waited. She opened her eyes. She kept reading. The story is longer than a letter can hold, but I will tell you what I can. I met your father when I was 22. I was pregnant with you within a year. Your father was not a bad man in the beginning. He was a scared man. He was a man who did not know how to be a man because his own father, your grandfather Thad, was the kind of man who did know, and Beckett had always felt like he could not measure up to him. Instead of trying, he ran. He ran from Thad first. He ran from me second. But before he ran from me, he did something worse. He let his brother Cormac into our lives. Cormac wanted the money. He always did. Thad had a house. Thad had land. Thad had a workshop. Thad had savings. Cormac had none of these things because Cormac spent everything he touched. He started coming around when you were 2. He would visit us. He would visit Thad. He would say he was checking in. What he was doing was watching. He was watching to see what Thad had and what he could get. Then Thad started building something for me. A cradle at first, then a rocking chair, then a chest. He was doing it because he loved you and because he had lost your grandmother years before and because I think he had been waiting a long time to be a grandfather. He was signing the pieces TA because that is how he signed everything. And Cormac saw them. And Cormac started asking questions. And Cormac figured out something that had been a secret for 20 years, which was that Thad's furniture was worth money. Real money. The kind of money that changes a family. Cormac tried to convince Beckett to help him take control of Thad's workshop, to get power of attorney, to convince a judge that Thad was not competent to manage his own affairs. Beckett was weak. Beckett was going to say yes. I stopped it. I went to Thad. I told him everything. He believed me. He was not surprised. He said he had seen it coming for years. He said he had been getting ready. But when Beckett found out I had told Thad, he came home one night and he told me I had to leave. He said if I did not leave, he would take you from me. He said he would find a way. He said he had a lawyer friend in Charlotte who owed him a favor. He said no judge would give a child to a mother whose own family thought she was unstable, and Cormac would say I was unstable. And Beckett would say it too, and they would take you. I believed him. I should not have. But I was 26 years old, and I was scared, and I did not know the law, and I did not know that Thad could have stopped him, so I left. I went to Oregon. I got a job. I sent letters. I sent letters. Every month for the first year, then every 2 months, then every 3. Beckett burned them. I know he did. I know because I sent the last few to Thad's address instead, and Thad wrote me back and told me. He said Beckett had been intercepting the mail. He said Beckett had told the postmaster in town that he would take care of my letters personally when they came out of respect for a private family matter. Thad found out in the spring of 2013. That was the year Beckett left, and the year Thad took you in for good. That was the year Thad began preparing. He put me in a separate trust. He set aside money for me in case I ever needed it. I never took it. I did not want the money. I only wanted you. He told me you were safe. He told me he was raising you. He told me he was teaching you woodworking on Saturdays. He told me you were the most patient student he had ever had, and that you had my hands, and that you had his father's eyes, and that you laughed the way I used to laugh when I was younger, and had not yet learned to be quiet about laughing. He told me I could see you when he thought you were ready. He said you were still too young to understand. He said if he brought me back into your life, while your father might still come around and cause damage, Beckett would poison you against me forever. He said we had to wait until you were older, until you had the strength to hear the story yourself. He was going to bring us back together. He promised me. He was going to do it when you turned 18. He said, Lorraine, give me a decade. When she is 18, I will bring her to you, and she will hear the truth from your own mouth, and she will decide. He did not make it. He died the year before you turned 18. I got the phone call from his lawyer. I flew to North Carolina. I stood in the back of the church at his funeral in a black hat, and I watched you from a distance. I did not know if you would recognize me. I did not know if I had the right to try. I saw you sit in the second row. I saw Beckett and Cormac sit in the front. I saw the way they treated you like a stranger. And I understood then that Thad had died before he could finish keeping his promise, and I did not know what to do. I wrote this letter 3 weeks after his funeral. Thad's lawyer sent me a package. Inside the package was a letter from Thad written months before he died. He told me that he had made a plan. He told me that he had built you a way in. He said, Lorraine, I have hidden a chapel in the woods and I have put you in it. Not the way you think. In a letter. In a hope chest. Behind 3 combination locks that only she will figure out how to open. When she opens it, she will find you. And you will decide, and she will decide, and it will be up to the 2 of you. So I wrote this. And I sent it to his lawyer, and I asked him to put it in the hope chest for me. If you are reading this, then you are ready. I am in Oregon. I have been in a small town outside Portland for 15 years. I work at a plant nursery. I have a garden. I have a dog. His name is Bruno. He is 12 years old and mostly deaf. I do not have another family. I did not have any more children. I did not remarry. I have been waiting for you in the only way I knew how, which was to keep my life in one place, so that if you ever wanted to find me, you would be able to. My phone number is at the bottom of this letter. So is my address. You do not owe me anything. You do not have to call. You do not have to write. If you decide you do not want to know me, I will understand. I have understood for 15 years. I will understand for the rest of my life. But if you want to know me, I am here. I love you. I have never stopped. I never will. Your mother, Lorraine. Wren read the letter. She read it again. She read it a 3rd time. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and set the envelope on the floor of the chapel beside her. She looked up at the vaulted ceiling of the workshop, at the cedar beams, at the pegboard with its 100 tools, at the 6 pieces of furniture arranged around the room, at the rocking chair that had held the key to the metal box, at the hope chest that had held her mother. Juniper was sitting beside her, watching her face. She put her hand on his back. She said out loud in the voice she used when she was talking to herself in a place too quiet to whisper, "Okay." Then she said it again. "Okay." She did not sleep at all that night. She sat on the floor of the chapel and she read every letter in the stack on the altar in the anteroom. Some referenced Lorraine, some referenced Beckett, some referenced Cormac. Most were about Ophelia. She read them in order from the earliest to the latest, and she learned her grandfather all over again, and she learned her grandmother for the first time. And somewhere around dawn, she came to a letter dated the spring of 2013, in which Thad had written about the day he had found out what Beckett had done to Lorraine. "I have never in my life been so angry," Thad had written. "Not at the mine collapse in '79 that killed 3 of my friends. Not at cancer taking Ophelia. This is a new kind of angry. This is the kind that will not burn itself out. So I am not going to let it burn. I am going to hammer it into something. I am going to hammer it into a place where the truth waits until Wren is old enough to find it. I am going to hammer it into a trust that Beckett and Cormac cannot touch. I am going to hammer it into a bank account they will never know about. I am going to hammer it into that chapel in the woods behind the house, the one I have been slowly building for Ophelia these 30 years. And I am going to finish the last part of it, the upper room, the hope chest, the altar, the locks. My wife's design will hide in every piece of wood, and my granddaughter's mother will wait for her in a hope chest. That is what I am going to do with this anger. I am going to build. Wren finished reading the letter as the sky outside the chapel windows turned pale gray. She stood up. She walked out of the chapel. She walked through the pines back toward Ilsa's house. Juniper walked beside her. She reached Ilsa's kitchen door as Ilsa was pouring the first pot of coffee. Ilsa looked at her. Wren said, I need to call Oregon. Ilsa said, use the phone in the kitchen. She did not ask why. Wren dialed the number from the letter standing at Ilsa's kitchen counter, with the receiver pressed against her ear, and it rang 4 times. And then a woman's voice said hello. Wren did not know how to speak. The voice said hello again. Wren said, my name is Wren Ashcombe. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the voice said, oh, honey. And Wren, who had not cried more than twice in 2 years, sat down on the floor of Ilsa's kitchen with the phone still against her ear, and she cried, and Juniper lay down next to her, and Ilsa, without a word, turned off the burner and walked into the next room and closed the door and left them alone. They talked for 2 hours. Wren did not remember most of what they said. She would remember the sound of her mother's breath catching every few sentences as if Lorraine had been holding it for 15 years and had only now remembered how to let it go. She would remember the moment Lorraine said, tell me about the dog, and Wren spent 10 minutes telling her about Juniper, and Lorraine had laughed once softly and had said, of course you would find a dog. Toward the end of the call, when they were both tired and there was a long pause, Lorraine said, will you let me come to you? Wren said yes. Lorraine said, I will fly out this week. Wren said, okay. That afternoon, Cormac's lawyer sent his first letter. Wren opened it at Ilsa's kitchen table and read it twice. Then she drove Ilsa's truck to a legal aid office in downtown Garner and showed it to a woman who spent 20 minutes on the phone with the trust's original firm in Raleigh. The woman hung up and looked at Wren. The trust was properly executed, filed, notarized, witnessed. The assets were transferred before your grandfather's death. There is no probate claim, so they cannot do anything. They can file a motion, the woman added. A judge will look at the documents and dismiss it. Your grandfather did this right. She handed the letter back. Keep this for your records, but do not lose sleep over it. Wren drove back to the chapel and set the letter in the metal box on the workbench beside her grandfather's letter and the deed in the bank book. 6 weeks later, the judge dismissed Cormac's motion. Cormac's lawyer sent a second letter, this one shorter, informing Wren that his client would not be pursuing further legal action. Wren folded that letter into the metal box too. She never saw Cormac again. She heard months later through Ilsa that he had moved to Charlotte and lost his construction license after a client sued him over an unfinished job. She did not feel anything when Ilsa told her. She had thought she would feel something, maybe satisfaction, maybe pity. What she felt was the absence of him. He was a man who had taken up space in her life for 2 years, and now he was gone, and the space was hers again. The list came out of the hope chest a week after her first phone call with Lorraine. Wren was cleaning the chest out, refolding the linen, checking the leaf carving on the inside when she noticed something under the base. A thin panel no thicker than a piece of cardboard glued along one edge. She pried it up. Underneath was a folded sheet of paper. A list, 42 names. Under each name was a description of a piece of furniture. A rocking chair for Helen Parker. A cradle for the Henderson family's second baby. A writing desk for Marcus Kettering in gratitude. A dining chair for a woman named Delphine Whitmore because she had watched The Boys the summer of 1982. A hope chest for a woman named Constance Boone, whose daughter had died the year before Phelia did, and who had come to the funeral and held Thad's hand. And near the top of the list in the third entry, Wren saw a name that made her stop. Ilsa Vermeer, a sewing cabinet. Cherry wood, because she brought Phelia soup for 6 weeks the year she was sick, and because she brought Wren coffee the morning after everything opened. Wren read that entry 3 times. The morning after everything opened. He had written that in the list. He had written it before he died, which meant either Thad had known somehow that a moment like that would come, or he had been so certain of who Ilsa was that he had written the entry assuming she would show up when it mattered. Wren thought it was the second one. She thought it was probably the second one. She read the note at the bottom of the list. These are the pieces I meant to give away and did not. Some of them are finished. Some of them are half finished. Some of them are only started. If you are reading this list, then it is your list now. Finish what I did not finish. Deliver what I did not deliver. Some of these women are gone. Give the piece to their daughters. Some of the daughters are gone. Give it to the granddaughters. Do not sell any of these. They are already spoken for. They have been spoken for since I started them. Wren counted the pieces she could see in the main workshop. 6. The list said 42. She looked around the workshop again, slowly. She saw it then, a door she had not noticed. In the back wall behind the pegboard, tucked behind a hanging tarp, she had assumed was decoration. She walked to it. She pushed the tarp aside. There was a door. Behind the door was a staircase going up. She climbed the stairs. She emerged in the second story of the chapel, the bell tower level, the space under the peaked roof that she had never guessed was accessible. The upper room was as large as the workshop below. Skylights cut into the roof let in daylight in soft angled shafts. And in that light, arranged along the walls and down the center of the room in careful rows, were 42 pieces of furniture, not all finished. Some were finished, some were half finished, some were just frames waiting to be filled in. But they were all there. Every one of them tagged with a small brass plaque hand engraved with a woman's name. Wren walked slowly through the room. She read the names as she passed. Helen Parker, Henderson family, Marcus Kettering, Ilsa Vermeer, Delphine Whitmore, Constance Boone, and on and on. Names she knew, names she had heard once in her life, names she had never heard, names of women who had helped Thad and Ophelia through 40 years of grief and struggle and the long, slow business of being alive in a small county in North Carolina. He had been building thank you gifts for 40 years, and he had not delivered them because he had wanted to make sure every one of them was perfect, because his standards had been higher than his years, because he had been building until the day he died and had run out of Saturdays. Wren stood in the middle of the upper room and she thought about the $11 she had folded in her pocket on a November night. And she thought about the woman in Oregon who was going to get on a plane in 3 days. And she thought about the sanding on a birdhouse when she was 11. And she thought about her grandfather in this room alone for 40 years, carving names into brass plaques. Rutherford Pike came out to see the upper room the next day. Wren had called him and told him what she had found. He had said very little on the phone. When he arrived, he walked up the stairs behind her and stepped into the upper room and did not speak for a full minute. Then he said, "Dear God, Wren," she said, "they are not for sale." He said, "No, of course they are not. But I need to help you deliver them. Because if you try to deliver 42 pieces of TA furniture without an escort, half the people in the county are going to think you are trying to sell them. And the other half are going to think it is a joke. Let me help you. Let me help your grandfather." She said, "All right." The airport moment came on a Saturday afternoon. Wren drove Ilsa's truck to Raleigh. Juniper sat in the passenger seat, ears alert, watching the road, as if he understood that something important was at the end of it. Wren had thought she might feel calm on the drive. She did not. Her hands were tight on the wheel. Her chest felt like it was carrying something that would not sit still. She parked at arrivals. She walked inside. She stood by the sliding doors that led out from the baggage claim, and she watched them open and close for people who were not her mother. Then they opened and a woman came out. She was smaller than Wren had expected. She was wearing a plain gray coat and carrying a canvas bag. Her hair was silver at the temples and dark everywhere else. She looked around, scanning the small crowd, and then her eyes stopped on Wren, and everything else in the terminal went out of focus. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Lorraine walked toward her. She did not run. She walked slowly with her canvas bag pressed against her chest, as if she were afraid of scaring away the last 15 years by moving too fast. Wren watched her come. She did not know what to do with her hands. Lorraine stopped in front of her. She was almost exactly Wren's height. She said, "Hello, sweetheart." Wren said, "Hi, Mom." The word came out of her mouth before she could decide whether to use it. She had not called anyone Mom since she was 4 years old. The word felt strange in her throat, like a tool she had forgotten she owned. Lorraine's eyes filled. She set the canvas bag on the floor. She reached out. Wren stepped into her. They held each other in the middle of the arrivals terminal for a long time. Wren felt her mother's shoulders shaking under her hands. She felt her mother's breath against her ear. She smelled shampoo, not the shampoo from her memory, a different one. But her body recognized the woman anyway, the way a body recognizes a room it has not been in for a long time. Juniper sat calmly at Wren's feet the whole time. When they finally pulled apart, Lorraine looked down at the dog. She crouched. She held out her hand. Juniper sniffed it, then leaned his head into her palm. Lorraine said, "So this is Juniper." Wren said, "Yes." Lorraine said, "Hello, Juniper. Thank you for staying with her." The dog thumped his tail once against the terminal floor. They drove back to Garner. Lorraine sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap. She looked out the window at the pine forest as they passed. She did not speak much. Wren did not either. There was time now. There would be time for a long while. Lorraine came to the chapel on Sunday morning. She had never been inside it. Thad had never brought her out here. He had wanted her to see it for the first time with Wren and Wren, without knowing Thad had wanted the same thing. They walked through the anteroom together. Wren told her mother the story of every object on the altar. The letters, the wooden ring, the photograph. Lorraine looked at Ophelia's picture for a long time. She had never met her mother-in-law. Ophelia had died 11 years before Beckett met Lorraine. She said, "You look like her." Wren said, "I know." They walked into the main workshop. Lorraine put her hand on the dining table. She put her hand on the writing desk. She sat briefly in the rocking chair. She did not say much. She did not need to. She was somewhere she had been waiting to be for 2 decades, and there was no rush. They climbed the stairs together and stood in the upper room in the light coming through the skylights among the 42 pieces of furniture waiting to be delivered. Lorraine said all this time. Wren said all this time. They stood there together for a long while. Then Lorraine walked slowly along the row of pieces reading the brass plaques. She stopped at one. She read it twice. She looked at Wren. She said, "My name is on this one." Wren walked over. She had not gotten that far in her own reading. She had not seen it. There on a small oak jewelry box half finished was a plaque. Lorraine Ashcombe. Because she loved my granddaughter and did not leave her by choice, and because I owed her something I could not repay in time. Lorraine put her hand over her mouth. She did not cry. Wren could see her not crying. It was harder work than crying would have been. She said he knew. Wren said yes. Lorraine said all this time he knew. The deliveries began the next week. They spent the next 4 months delivering the pieces. Ilsa drove sometimes. Rutherford drove sometimes. Lorraine came along for many of them. Wren delivered every piece herself. She would knock on the door or the door of the daughter or the door of the granddaughter, and she would say, "My grandfather, Thaddeus Ashcombe, made this for you, or for your mother, or for your grandmother. He wanted you to have it." Some of the women cried, some invited her in. Some told her stories about Thad and Ophelia that she had never heard. Delphine Whitmore was 90 years old and living in a nursing home. When Wren brought her the dining chair Thad had built for her 43 years ago, she ran her hand along the seat and said, "Oh, that boy. That sweet boy," he remembered. Helen Parker's daughter received the rocking chair. She said she had not known her mother even knew Thad. Wren told her the story of the porch railing. The Henderson family got the cradle. The second baby was now 46 years old and had a daughter of her own who was pregnant. The cradle had a new user waiting for it. Constance Boone had died in 2017. Her daughter still lived in the family house. Wren delivered the hope chest, and the daughter said she remembered her mother talking about Thad. She said her mother had told her when she was small that there was a man in the woods who built things for the women in the town, and that if you ever needed anything mended and could not afford to have it mended, you went to him. Wren said that was my grandfather. The daughter said, I know. I thought he was a story. The delivery to Ilse Vermeer was the one Wren had been thinking about for weeks. She waited until the sewing cabinet was finished. It had needed 2 coats of oil and a new set of drawer pulls that Wren carved herself out of a piece of walnut left over from the rocking chair she had been working on. She spent an extra day on the leaf pattern, cutting it deeper into the cherry than Thad had planned, because she wanted Ilse's cabinet to be one that people would notice. She loaded it into the back of Ilse's own truck on a Tuesday morning in February, and she drove it a quarter-mile down the road and she parked in Ilse's driveway. Ilse came out of the house in her quilted jacket. She said, "What have you got there?" "Wren said something my grandfather left for you." She lifted the tarp. Ilse looked at the sewing cabinet. She looked at the plaque on the front. She read her own name engraved in her friend's handwriting from 40 years ago, and she put one hand against the side of the truck to steady herself. Wren said he wrote in the list that it was for the 6 weeks of soup you brought Phelia when she was sick, and for the morning coffee you brought me. Ilse said he wrote about my coffee. Wren said he wrote about your coffee. Ilse stood in her driveway and cried without covering her face. Wren had never seen her do that. Ilse cried the way a woman cries when she has been waiting a long time to be included in a story she thought she was on the outside of. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand and she said, "Well, bring it inside. It is not going to move itself." They carried the sewing cabinet into Ilse's living room and set it against the wall by the window where the light was best. Ilse ran her hand along the top. She opened the drawers one by one, feeling the smooth glide of the runners Thad had cut by hand 30 years ago. She looked at the leaf carving. She said, "That is Phelia's." Wren said, "Yes." Ilse said, "Tell him thank you. Next time you talk to him." Wren said, "I will." They stood in the room for a moment without speaking. Then Ilse said, "All right, now go home. You have work to do." Beckett came to the cabin in the spring. Wren had moved into the cabin on County Road 14 in March. She had spent every dollar she could spare on fixing it up. Ilse had helped. Rutherford had helped. Half the plumbers and electricians in the county had shown up at some point and refused to take money because Thad had once done something for their mother or their aunt or their sister. The cabin now had a working stove and a working shower and drywall in every room, and a wood stove that Wren fed each morning with cordwood she had split herself. The lean-to next to the cabin she had converted into her own small workshop. Not a chapel, a workshop. She had brought a set of Thad's tools with her. The rest she left in the chapel because the chapel was still where her grandfather lived, and she was not ready to empty it out. Beckett walked up the dirt road one Saturday afternoon in April. He was alone. He had no truck. He had walked or been dropped off. He was wearing a denim jacket and his hands were in his pockets, and he looked smaller than Wren remembered. Wren was in the workshop when she saw him coming. She set down the plane she had been working with. She walked out to the edge of the lean-to. She waited. He stopped 10 feet from her. "You set this up yourself," he said. "Yes, looks like his workshop. That is the idea." He stood there. The silence went on for a while. "He said your grandfather tried to teach me, when I was your age, Saturday mornings. I would not do it." "I know," she said. "I should have." He looked at the ground. Then he looked at the workshop behind her. He did not step closer. "Your mother," he said. He stopped. He did not know how to say it. Wren waited. He said, "Is she talking to you?" "Yes." He nodded once. He said, "Does she hate me?" Wren thought about it. She had been thinking about it for months. She had been thinking about what to say to her father if this exact question ever came. She said she did, for a long time. Beckett nodded again. "She does not hate you now," Wren said. "She does not have room for it. Neither do I. That does not mean either of us wants you in the house today. It means we are not spending our energy on you anymore. That is not the same thing as forgiveness. It is not the opposite of it either. Beckett looked up at her. Something moved in his face that she could not read. He said, I am sorry, Wren, for what I did to your mother, for what I let Cormac do to you, for not being there. She said, I know. He said, I do not know what to do. She said, I do not know what you should do, but I am not going to tell you. I am 19 years old, and I am not your parent. He almost smiled. It was a broken smile. He said, no, you are not. She said, you can come by, if you want. Sometimes you do not have to walk. Ilsa has a truck. My mother is going to be here through the summer off and on. I am not saying that will be comfortable. I am saying it is what is happening. He nodded. He said, all right. He turned to walk back down the road. She said, Dad. He turned back. She said, I built the porch on that cabin, all by myself. If you come back, look at the porch. It is not perfect. There is a gap in one of the joints about 1/8 of an inch that I could not close. I decided to leave it. Grandpa would have made me fix it, but I am not him, and the gap is mine. Beckett stood there for a long moment. He said, I will look at it. Then he walked back down the road, and Wren watched him go until she could not see him anymore. And Juniper leaned against her leg, and she stood in the doorway of the lean-to for a while after he was gone. She did not know what to feel about the visit. She did not try to figure it out. Some things needed room to settle before a person knew what they were. Summer came slowly. Lorraine spent it in a small rented room in Ilsa's house 1/4 mile from the property. She had not moved to North Carolina permanently. She had a life in Oregon, and Wren was not asking her to give it up. They had agreed, without exactly saying so, that they would take this a piece at a time. Lorraine would come out for months at a stretch. Wren would fly to Oregon in the fall. They would build the relationship the way Wren knew how to build. Slowly, with attention, letting the wood move. Wren finished the last of the 42 pieces in June. The last one on the list had no name attached to it. It was a rocking chair, half finished. The runners were carved. The seat was scooped. The back was framed. But it had not been sanded, and it had not been oiled, and it had no plaque. At the bottom of the list in Thad's hand was a note beside this one. For you if you want it, or for whoever comes next. Your choice. Wren finished it herself. She used walnut from the same salvage yard where Thad had gotten his last batch of church pew boards. Wood 70 years old, seasoned past anything you could buy. She shaped the arms the way Thad had shaped his curve down to gentle points. But she made the back taller and narrower her own proportion. Her body, not his. The runner she cut from a single board matching the grain so the two sides looked like they came from the same tree, which they did. The seat she scooped by hand with a scorp, working in slow passes until the hollow was smooth enough to sit in without feeling a ridge. She sanded everything. 3 grits, then 4. Then she rubbed the wood with linseed oil, 2 coats, letting it dry between. When she was done, she took a small chisel and carved on the underside of the seat in a corner where nobody would see it unless they were looking a small leaf. Then next to the leaf, she carved her own initials. W.A. not T.A., her grandmother's mark. Her own initials, together. 2 women, 3 generations of hands on the same piece of wood. She set the rocking chair on the porch of the cabin. She sat in it. It rocked in a smooth, even arc. It did not wobble. Juniper looked up from his spot in the last patch of sun and thumped his tail twice. That evening, Lorraine walked up from Ilsa's house for dinner. She climbed the porch steps, which did not creak anymore, and she stopped when she saw the chair. She looked at it for a long moment. She sat down in it. She put her hands on the arms. She said, "Oh." Wren said, "Do you like it?" Lorraine said, "I have not been in a chair like this since I was a girl. My own grandmother had one. I forgot how it felt." She rocked slowly. She said, "He taught you well." Ren said they both did. She just did not know she was teaching me. Lorraine looked at her. She said, "Is her leaf on this one?" Ren said, "Yes. And my initials, not his." Lorraine nodded. She kept rocking. She did not say anything more for a long time. Then she said, "When I fly back to Oregon in September, will you come with me for a week? To see where I live, to meet the dog, to sit in my kitchen?" Ren said yes. Lorraine said all right. Ilsa came by later that evening. She climbed the porch steps. She saw the chair. She saw Lorraine sitting in it. She saw Ren beside her in a smaller chair Ren had built the month before. She saw Juniper at their feet. She said, "Well, look at that." Ren said, "Sit down. I will get you coffee." Ilsa sat down. Ren went inside. When she came back with 3 mugs, Ilsa and Lorraine were talking quietly the way women do when they have decided they are going to be part of the same story from now on. Ren handed out the mugs. Ilsa said Thad would have liked this. Ren said he would have told me the seat angle on my chair is about 2 degrees too steep. Ilse laughed. Lorraine laughed too, a small, surprised laugh, as if she had forgotten she could. It was the first time in a long while that Ren had laughed easily. She thought about him then. Not with grief, with something quieter. She thought about how her grandfather had spent 40 years building a chapel for a woman who was already gone, and how he had known without needing to be told that love did not stop being useful just because the person you loved was no longer standing in front of you. He had loved Ophelia by carving her leaf into every table and every chair for 4 decades. He had loved Ren by hiding a chapel in the woods and putting her mother inside it. He had loved Lorraine by keeping her name on a list of women he owed something to, and by making sure Ren would be the one to deliver the piece with her mother's name on it. That was what building meant. That was what her grandfather had been trying to teach her every Saturday morning of her childhood, and she had thought he was teaching her about wood. Ilsa went home after dark. Lorraine stayed. She helped Ren wash the dishes. She sat in the rocking chair on the porch for another hour watching the pines. Then she walked back down the road to Ilsa's spare room, and Ren watched her go with Juniper at her side. She went into the lean-to before she slept. Thad's journal sat closed on the workbench. Next to it, a fresh piece of walnut. Waiting. She ran her hand along the wood. Tomorrow she would start the next one. She did not know what it was going to be yet, but she knew how to begin.